I'm excited about this episode of the Elite Recruiter podcast. I have my special guest who's a staple of the industry, who is a person that I've met so many top billers time and time again. They said that this person, his books and his training is one of the reasons why they're successful. And I'm so happy to bring him on the podcast. And a quick shout out to Tom Alessio for actually setting this up. But my special guest, Steve Finkel, who is probably one of the greatest trainers when it comes to the recruiting industry. And we're going to talk about how you can make 2024 your best year yet. So, Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm quite confident that if we put this together properly, we can present material that will genuinely result in increased production for everybody here, regardless of what level of skill they might be at.
And one of the things that I know we were talking a little bit offline, and you said something about making a small mistake, you can lose a fee. But if you make a few mistakes over and over, you want to give me that line again?
Yeah, what I basically said is that one mistake can cost you a fee. The same mistake made over and over again can cost you a fortune. This business is one that really does require, for maximum results, serious depth of knowledge, depth of attention, precision. And I think over a period of this presentation, I can give you some pretty good examples of that.
Awesome. Well, we all, as most of you guys know, we always jump in the podcast and we start off like, how did you end up in this wonderful world of recruiting?
Steve Finkel's background is probably threefold. And the first part of it, the foundation, is probably the most significant, not relative necessarily to working on a desk. There are people that get into this business with all kinds of backgrounds and they become successful. But if you want to become ultimately, I would like to think a top flight manager, but certainly a serious trainer of advanced level people, it's the only background that could be done. What I have done is for decades worked as an in-house trainer with the most successful, most skilled people on 5 continents. And I've improved their production significantly. And the way I did that pretty much goes with my own background. When I was 18 years old, I wanted to be the world's greatest salesman. Now, I will not claim that I have achieved that, but that truly was what I wanted to be when I was 18 years old and I was in direct sales. I started reading, and I read Frank Betcher. I read Charles Roth, wonderful writer, probably 15, 20 books. I read Elmer Wheeler, Percy Whiting. I read everything I could, and I didn't only read. I did what I hope people do with my books. I underlined, I highlighted, I put stars in the margins, I reviewed, I practiced. Before every call, I'd review what I wanted to achieve. And then after every call, I go, okay, well, how did that go? But after a couple of years, there was a problem. There I was, the world's greatest salesman, and at least in my own mind, and I had only sold one product. Something wrong with that thought process. So I got into corporate sales, ultimately with several different Fortune 500 companies. The Fortune 500 companies have huge amounts of money to spend on training and developing their sales forces. But it generally goes to waste because an awful lot of the people really are not motivated to go to these extended seminars, which pull them away from home and family and business and everything like that for 5 days at a time. But I was sure motivated. Kimberly Clark's industrial division, which is the one that I started with industrially. I went to Xerox Professional Selling Skills, which was a 5-day program. I went to Lee Boyan's program on cold call selling. I went over to Dale Carnegie, several courses on relationship selling. I went to a number of training programs, and these were 5-day deals. And I sat in front and I'm taking notes and I'm reviewing the material and I'm going over. It was classical sales training. Then I changed to another company And once again, they sent me to Xerox PSS2. I went to several. Tom Hopkins wrote a wonderful book called How to Master the Art of Selling. And I went to 2 different 5-day programs from his standpoint. There was Philip Lund, Compelling Selling. Uh, I was I was on a roll, and I was if I wasn't the world's best salesman, and some of the accomplishments that I achieved in my 2 sales territories indicated I was pretty darn good. I was surely the best educated salesman in the world. And then I took, frankly, a year off to train in martial arts 6 hours a day for a year. I
What belt
ran
did
out
you get
of
up
money
to?
at some point. Pardon me.
I said, what belt did you get up to?
I'm second-degree black belt in one style of karate. I'm first degree at a different style. I've got rank in 6 different martial arts. Once upon a time, I was number 4 ranked middleweight fighting on the tournament circuit. But what it did, and I'll tell you this, we're getting into this. A gentleman named Funakoshi said the aim of martial arts is not in winning or losing, but in the perfection of character of its participants. And if my character is not perfect, the truth is, when I got into recruiting, it is a matter of, to some degree, character, and it helped me along quite substantially.
And so you went from, Fortune 500 sales, you went into
Right.
martial arts, you decided to take a break, and then
Well, it was, yeah. Uh,
a
I,
fun
I
break.
yeah, it was a 1 year break. It was following what I did, but then I walked into this industry, and by golly, it was terrific. I got lucky, in all honesty. I walked into a management recruiters operation, and the 2 managers of the management recruiters operations were skilled beyond what MR taught. Sam Warner had been the top salesman in the history of dictaphone. Michael Addis had been a regional manager with National Cash Register, which was the foundation of modern selling. And they knew what they had. They started talking about sales to me, and I'm going, oh man. And I'm talking about the relationship school of selling, and I'm talking about the process school of selling. And they're going, we better hire this guy. And they brought me in, and for 2 years, uh, fortunately, they combined their own levels of selling, which were significant, with the system. And I learned the management recruiter system as well as, I think, as well as it's possible to be learned. You can't really learn the system in 2 years, but I wasn't starting from ground zero. I was a skilled and educated salesman to start with. And then at the end of 2 years, I went back and I redid it. I reviewed all the sales background I had, and I went through this, and I'm thinking, all right, why do they do it this way? Why is the verbiage that way? How come the send out to placement ratio is where it is? How come they're losing these deals? Why are they not putting deals together? What about if you phrased it this way? How about that rebuttal? There's a martial arts phrase that goes, obsessed is the word the lazy use to describe the dedicated.
It's true.
And maybe I wasn't obsessed. It's hard to say, but I was sure dedicated. I was reinventing this industry based on strong classical selling skills, which were overwhelming compared to what existed in this industry. And then I opened up my own operation. And frankly, I kind of had to go back, and it was useful from a training and from a knowledge standpoint because I had to redo it all over again. What was working for me would work for other people, but that was on the basis of my own background and skills. So I had to redo it and think, okay, well, how do I rephrase this so I can teach it to other people? Uh, some people really have great talent in this industry individually, but they can't replicate that talent. What I wanted was the industry, the sales, and something replicatable. And that's exactly what I did and put it all together. And it's turned out the sort of thing that not only is useful for new people, but really advances the skill and production of experienced people astronomically.
Oh, that's phenomenal. Well, and that kind of, and I absolutely love that story just because you went from a strong sales background, then you ran into the recruiting space, kind of, or maybe stumbled across it, like many of us, And then you went and opened up your own office, your own operation, and everything that you've learned, you started implementing.
Right.
And
First,
then,
started as a one-man show, and then I had to teach other people and open new offices and all sorts of stuff.
and that goes into like the one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to bring you on this podcast is, for the recruiters out there that are looking to improve themselves. You were able to improve an entire team in multiple offices. How does a recruiter work on improving themselves?
Experienced recruiters, good recruiters, have got a great asset, but they don't necessarily bring it to bear on themselves. And that asset that they've got is they can listen to somebody else on the phone, both sides, not just one side, but both sides, and they can pick out things that could be done differently. An experienced person could listen to a new individual and say, you did this wonderfully, but here's an area that you could have improved. And they can listen to an experienced person and say, okay, look, this is what you need to work on, or you didn't handle that well, or here was something about your manner of presentation that needs to be corrected. They can't do that for themselves because they lack objectivity. And the answer to that objectivity is doing what everybody in sports does. Every single person in a top level professional sport records their athletic performances and watches it afterwards and sees what they could have done better, what they could have done worse, where they made a mistake. Now, recording ourselves from the standpoint of videotaping is not going to be useful, but our equivalent is recording our phone conversations. We can't do this for ourselves because we lack objectivity, but recording your phone conversations, a certain type of call, 15 minutes a day, 3 days a week, or maybe even two, after hours, will enable any experienced person to see what he's doing and improve himself. Now, there are a couple of comments that should be made. One is, you notice you don't record everything that happens on that phone call. 15 minutes, twice a week, maybe 3 times a week, after hours, because you need distance to lend objectivity. In the aftermath of hearing the call, it really wouldn't be useful. You would hear what you think happened on that call, but you listen to it afterwards, and you will spot things that you could have done better. Now, the second key to doing this is you need to write down what you need to improve upon. It's no good to kind of mumble to yourself, gee, I interrupted him too much. Gee whiz, I spoke too rapidly. Gee, I could have responded to that objection better. You need to write it down. And you need truthfully to put a sign on your phone or on your computer or someplace where you're going to see it, where you remember to do this just a little bit better. Now look at all the different portions of a business. So that really opens it up into many portions of this business where you can continue to do this on an ongoing basis. Now, I will issue a warning so nobody gets terrified when they actually start to do this. Everyone sounds bad to himself when he listens to recording of himself. You're going to listen to yourself and go, gee, do I really sound like that? Be aware of that. Don't worry, you don't sound that way. People tell me I have a good voice, and I hope that's true. But I've spent a great deal of time in the recording studio, recording various products or books or things like that in an audio format. And all I can tell you is the guy that they hear that sounds good is not the person that I'm listening to at the recording studio, because he doesn't sound terribly well. So I suggest to you that's an easy way that could be really implemented by any experienced person that will enable him to improve his own skills pretty darn quickly.
And it's kind of funny. I never thought about doing that. Actually, David Stephen Patterson for a little while ran a dojo where people did that. And like that was some of the things that the recruiters did. But outside of that, like it's something that you just don't think about is going back and recording your own calls and recording your own video. And it's a lesson that like I've kind of learned with the podcast. You know, there's a lot of times where I go back in the recording and I'm editing it, and I'm like, oh man, I said too many times, or I said this, or I cut off the speaker on when they were going into something amazing. And you really start to, as you're listening to yourself, and so like you said, I'm like, oh crap, I sound like that. You start listening to yourself and you're like, okay, these are the things that I could start making improvements on.
Right.
So
And it could be
I,
your manner of presentation. It could be the material.
mhm. So excited about doing that. So recording calls, easy step that recruiters can start implementing, especially with the way technology has. Like I can just get my voice over internet and turn on call recordings, and I'm done with that.
Don't do too much. Don't do too much.
But like, there are so many facets to this business. What are some other things that like we could do to improve on?
Well, the other is once again to do what uh, any professional does. Look, there is a big difference between how an amateur trains and a professional trains. You think of sports. An amateur plays a lot of golf, plays a lot of tennis, does the same thing over and over, and he will improve to a certain degree. But a professional breaks it down step by step into the independent modules and spends an awful lot of time working on this individual module by itself, and then this individual module by itself, and this individual module by itself. He'll spend a lot. I mean, you think of a golfer, my goodness, he doesn't just play a lot of golf. He works on his drives, he works on his putts, he works on his chip shots, he works on long putts, short putts. Who knows what there might be involved? And he doesn't only work on standard stuff. Tiger Woods, famous golfer, was seen taking a golf ball, stepping on it into the dirt, and then hitting that difficult lie over and over again, stepping on it into the dirt, hitting the difficult lie, stepping on it into the. Now, maybe he'd only encounter that particular shot, who knows, twice a year, 3 times, whatever it might be. But when it happened, who would do better? Someone who had not practiced that or someone who had? All right. The individual, this goes back, sales was invented. It took creative geniuses to arrive at a real structured way of selling and different schools of thought. And one of the greatest of them all was John Henry Patterson of National Cash Register. John Henry Patterson believed that there was no such thing as a sales call. There was an opener, a presenting of the presentation, a presenting of the prospect, a close, a rebuttal, and it was broken down. And that's what we need to do. You think of, I'll give you an easy example of this. And it's an example, a real one. There's no such thing as a recruiting call. There are about 8 different segments which put together make a recruiting call. And you can work on these individual segments and find out where you're doing well and where you're not doing well, and practice those individual segments just as a golfer might practice individual chip shots. Let me give you a case study. It is sometimes difficult to think of a concept such as segmenting the call and working on the individual segments and then saying, okay, neat, how does this apply?
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a real good example. A couple of years ago, I worked with a client, a pretty good sized client, and the problem that they ran into, I was working with them at that time, was all they knew how to do, or at least all they had fallen back on doing to find candidates, was they worked on LinkedIn and they worked on Bullhorn and they worked on ZipRecruiter and they did all this kind of stuff. And that's how they found candidates. Well, I was brought in to address many areas of identifying candidates that nobody else had over the telephone and in various different ways, and really identifying candidates unrelated to the internet. All right. It worked very well for them, and they became genuinely skilled and successful recruiters. But the owner gave me a call a couple of years ago. The problem was they were not marketing candidates. They quit. They simply weren't doing any marketing of candidates. Now, look, marketing candidates, should be done. People fall into two categories or firms. On the one hand, you have got some firms, and that's all they know how to do is market candidates. Well,
Yeah.
good, but there are many other things that they should be doing to generate clients and fees. But then on the other hand, you have got sometimes they're retainer firms, sometimes they're upscale, as these people were contingency recruiters, and they just didn't do marketing of candidates because that's not the kind of people they were. Or they tried to market candidates and they didn't get very good results. So they quit marketing candidates, not getting results. The owner wanted me to come down and conduct a training program, as I had done for her some years previously, on this subject. But I thought that if we did this properly, and if she would work with me and follow the suggestions I had for implementing, we could accomplish a thing through a Zoom conference and through conversations and
Hmm.
follow-ups that I would suggest. So uh, we got on the phone, pardon me, which is on the Zoom with them, and I pointed out to them, there's no such thing as a singular marketing the candidate call. There are 8 segments to a marketing the candidate call. And once you know those, you can work on them individually to improve them and put them together. I'll give you an example. First of all, there are a lot of things that you should be doing in the normal course of your working day to identify companies that would be open to an MPC call and what
Hmm.
type of candidates they would be interested in. And if you don't do that on a regular basis and obviously keep track, you're going to be into the marketing candidate, marketing candidate, marketing candidate, and that's not useful. Secondly, you've got to get calls returned. I will address this later if you would like. But for the moment, if you're the world's best recruiter, the world's best marketing of candidates, and you don't get calls returned, there's a certain problem on your hands. It is fixable. Thirdly, you need to select the marketable candidate. Edward de Bono, who was an excellent writer on creative thinking, had a really neat section called the experience trap. And we see this in many people. They know how things should be done. And so they're hooked into their experience trap, their little section of here's how it should be done. Well, they go, well, I know what a marketable candidate is. No, they knew what a placeable candidate was. These were experienced people. They were good people. They knew what a placeable candidate was. But a marketable candidate is an entirely different type of individual that must meet different criteria than a placeable candidate. So they were trying to market the candidate with a candidate that didn't meet the specific criteria. Then you've got the opener. Elmer Wheeler of the Linguistic School of Selling said that the first 25 words you say are more important than the next 1,000 words you say. Because if they aren't the right 25,000 words, you will never get to the next 1,000 words. So they had to work on their opener. Then there was the opening positioning of the candidate, presenting the candidate, and there were things that should be left out because you've got to force interaction on a marketing call. You don't want to be saying everything. The hiring authority ought to be saying, what kind of education does she have? Why does he want to leave? What is she currently earning? So that you can get some interaction. Then you've got to close. Then you definitely have got to have not just one, but 2 or 3 rebuttals, responses to the well-known, gee, we don't need anybody like that right now. Instead of what many people immediately do, jumping on, okay, well, what kind of needs do you have in the future? What are you looking for? No good.
The easy way outs.
That's exactly right. And then you do need to end those at the end after the rebuttals. But these are 8 sections. And I presented these 8 portions and that each one of them needed to be worked on individually. And the owner jumped up and down and she said, you're right, Steve. We never thought of it before. What I will immediately do is I will start telling my people to market more candidates and I will keep track of them every Monday to see how many they've marketed. And I'm going, No, no, you won't. Stop, halt. What am I, a speaker? I mean, I'm a serious trainer here. I'm not presenting material. This has got to work for you. Now, where are you going to go to get this information that we're all talking about? Where are these things? And she goes, well, and I said, I see you've got a book of mine called Unlimited Clients, Perfect Prospecting for Today's Recruiter. Now, I wrote the book, recent book, but I wrote it 3 years ago, but I'm recalling that there are about 4 or 5 chapters of this 35 chapter book on this subject. Do you remember them? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, what do you think about the book? She said, great book. How long since you've read it? Well, I got it a year ago and it was terrific. Well, that's fine. How long since you've read it? A year. Okay, all right, here. Let me tell you what you are going to do. You are going to go to my website and you are going to order a copy of that book for each one of your people. I suggest you order it because we're doing this Zoom conference right now. Get it priority so that you get up there faster instead of regular mail. Send it priority. When it gets there, this is a manager's suggestion. You're going to autograph it to each person individually, not just here's a book, have fun, but you're going to autograph it, to Bob, a future superstar, to Susan, to help you go from good to great, to Debbie, the best around who can improve, or something of that, and then date it and sign it and give it to them. Then you're going to conduct a series of sales meetings 3 days a week on every one of the chapter which apply to what we're talking about. And then once you go through your sales meetings, you are going to break up into teams. You are going to be practicing role playing. One person is going to pick up the phone, call and attempt to market a candidate to someone else. Someone else is going to pick up the phone, call and attempt to market a candidate to someone else. This is called deliberate practice. And then once you've gone through this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, then you're going to start making calls. The other person has got to give real specific, evaluative, constructive feedback. You can't just be doing this, practicing it over and over and over again. Realize that role playing or deliberate practice without feedback is like bowling with a curtain over the lane. I mean, you think about that, there you are practicing, but you don't get any feedback. And how long would you continue to improve? How long would you keep on bowling? No good here. All right. And then once you do that and your people get on the phone, they are going to record their calls and they're going to listen to them 3 days a week after hours. And then finally, they're going to record their calls once they smooth it out and they're going to send it to me. I do an awful lot of phone consulting. And part of that is people mail me their email to me, recordings of a specific type of call. I listen to them. I contact them back. We do role playing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that's how you are going to get down this marketing the candidate concept, which you are not really doing at this particular time. Does that make sense to you, Linda? Okay, we will do that. And they did. And I just recently heard from her, and I can tell you what the results are.
Go. What were they?
Right. This happened about a year and a half ago. So we got solid results. Last year for them was pretty well flat in terms of their marketplace. So the results were not really affected that we could tell by a great market or by a bad, or they were pretty well flat. What they had done, however, during that year was the company, these were experienced, successful people, had increased their production by 40%. And of that 40%, they could attribute 75% of that is to say 30% of the 40%, directly to marketing the candidates that have been hired and picked up fees out of it. And the remaining 10% of the 40, they couldn't measure precisely, but they thought it came from the additional new clients that they had picked up as a result of that. It was a successful firm to start with, but they had improved their production by 40% simply due to segmenting and practicing the individual calls and doing the role playing or deliberate practice, as it is phrased, that was helped them to implement it along with the follow-ups and critiques that they were doing.
So
That's what I mean by segmenting. Otherwise, when I listened to these people, they were all doing different things wrong. I mean, I'm saying wrong ineffectively. Some of them were not presenting candidates properly. Some of them were giving them all the information. Some were not doing rebuttals. Others were not leaving good messages. And they were just doing different segments. If we hadn't broken them down, segmenting them like that, all they would have said was, marketing candidates don't work. My marketing candidates don't get me the results, because they were looking at the whole rather than the individual segments.
I really like how you broke that down into, first of all, the athletic background. There's a lot of athletes in our space. And I remember I ran cross country and track and field in college. And when you think of a mile race, you just think it's a mile. But my coach had it broken down on what we were supposed to do, sometimes on every single part of the 100. So there's, 100 meters and, per quarter, 4 quarters in a mile. And she had it broken down into like, this part of the race, you do this part of the race, you do that, this part of, the quarter, you do this. And it's something that you just don't think about so often. We're in the day-to-day minutia of recruiting and sales. But I want to ask you the question, and you kind of like highlighted a little bit. The amount of time that these recruiters took to learn how to make these calls better, how long did it take? And the reason why I'm asking this is because a lot of times we start, going through a book or hopping in a podcast, and we start seeing all these things that we need to improve on. But how long did it take these recruiters to learn how to make these amazing marketing calls?
In this situation that we are talking about here, I told her not to make any marketing calls, not to let her people make any marketing calls for 2 weeks. Because if they had automatically jumped into it going, oh yeah, marketing, no good. They had to train, they had to study, they had to practice, they had to, putting aside getting the books, which we had to ship to her, we had to do individual 2 weeks of reviewing the material, conducting sales meetings, and they could go through that fairly quickly, and then doing the role playing that's needed. Now, look, you don't have to role play everything. Take an example. I made reference to Tiger Woods on a difficult section. Suppose you and I, or two people, were role playing recruiting. Well, recruiting is a broad area. What are the certain segments? Once you have to role play the entire recruiting call, and you should, the feedback will eventually break down to where some people are doing some things well, other things not so well. Some people may be excellent at getting candidate concerns, which is absolutely critical. They're really good at getting candidate concerns, but they're not good at rebuttals, at overcoming, well, gee, I'm mostly pretty happy where I am. Other people may be very good at listening and using the correct amount of rebuttals to get to the certain point where it's not going to work, and then they switch, but they're weak at getting candidate concerns. Well, once we separate that out, I'm giving you an example. There's no reason these people have to do all of this completely. They need to role play at what they are not good at. There was a real interesting study some time ago of top flight professional ice dancers. And we tend to think of ice dancers as, pretty girls that jump around on the ice wearing nice outfits. But the reality is they have to train. And when they make a mistake, it hurts because they hit the ice and it hurts. What they found, the best ice dancers worked on what they were not good at. They worked on the jumps that they didn't do well. The less than good ones, the ones that never made it to the Olympics, they practiced over and over the ones that they already did well. It's the same in our business. When you break them down, again, you're referring to sports. When you break them down, you will do segmented, some things well, other things not, within the course of a specific type of call. That's what you work on, and that's what you improve on.
And when it comes down to, and it's one of the things that like talking with you that's really opened my eyes is there's so many different things in the recruiting world that we can work on improving on. A 1% improvement here, a 5% improvement there, a 10% over there. That we just,
That's where you get better. Look, everybody, I have to say, I have done in-house training and sometimes books, videos, where people will say, "Gosh, it doubled my income," and that's true. I have quite a number of people that, as an example, they have been losing 50% of their deals from turndowns or counteroffers or whatever. They simply weren't recruiting well, or they, for whatever reason, they literally did double their production. I'm delighted to hear that. But that's not the real point of the story. That could definitely happen. And I think perhaps with many people, it certainly has. But if you improve 20% here, 10% there, 15% here, maybe 30% there is an enormous capacity with most recruiters to really dramatically improve their skill level. And that directly translates to dramatically improving their production. And it's also a lot of fun. I mean, the truth is, you hear people that say, "Son, I got 20 years in this business." Oh, no kidding. Gee whiz. When you go on automatic, and we all know what they're automatic, you do the same thing over and over and over and over again. It's quite possible that you're practicing your mistakes. Now, it's a great industry because the truth is you can kind of half learn this business and still do pretty darn well. And that happens. You think of a new person, he comes in and he learns how to generate new clients kind of halfway. But then he goes to another way, identifying candidates, and he learns enough to get by, and he learns to recruit, and he learns enough to get by, and then he learns to follow, and he learns enough, and all this, and he does all this kind of stuff. It's a good business. People need our services. We provide a genuinely absolute top light requirement for companies. But the problem with that is you can be not all that great and do pretty darn well till the recession occurs. I will not terrify people by talking about the turnover rate in this industry during a recession
oh, it's
or
high.
or a cataclysmic event which causes a recession. I mean, it's not always economic. Sometimes it's external and gee whiz, and the problem is under those circumstances, the people that really are doing pretty decently and they think they're doing pretty decently and they are, but it's on the basis of this industry being a great industry, but their skills are not where they should be. The marginal people aren't going to be there. The people that really work to develop their skills maximally will get by and do better than get by, will do very, very well because in the aftermath of a recession, companies start hiring. But our industry is under consultantized. I don't know if that's a real word, but I think it's a pretty appropriate one. The point is, a substantial portion, I don't want to terrify people, of the industry will drop out during a questionable marketplace because they don't have the skills to get by. Companies come back, and all of a sudden, you pick up the business that they would have had in a good market, but it is a good market, but they're not there anymore, and you pick up that industry. That's a real good time, but it's only on the heels of having serious professional level skills. And I might say that only comes from professional level sales training.
And sales training, what I have seen across the industry is one of the places as a whole we're the weakest on. Most of the time, you a lot of recruiters get like 2 weeks of training, and that's it when it comes to sales. So it's one of the things, and that's why I'm excited to have you on this podcast, is really just talking about these little micro increases that we could start making to, at the end of the day, make a ton more money.
I think that's an accurate statement.
So how do you actually get a client or a candidate to call you back?
Ben, that's something that you hear all the time from people. Nobody returns phone calls. It automatically goes to voicemail. Nobody answers the phone. And unfortunately, if you don't get that worked out, it leads you to believing it. And that's simply not true. And thus you go into emails and things like that that are not terribly effective. What is true is that people have not taken the time to really think how to get calls returned and to develop a strategy. When you ask these people, well, what kinds of messages do you leave? Admittedly, there is a difference between candidate and client, but for the moment, we'll put them together. You get, here's what I say. Okay, fine. What else? Well, that's what I say over and over and over again. Well, how did they arrive at that? Chances are when you ask them, it's either something they pulled out of their personal life, or it's something they heard from their manager, or something they heard on a webinar from someone pretending to be a trainer with a magic, here's what you say. But there's a couple of problems with that. One of them is what works for even a competent manager may not work for you. People are different. Take an example. Here's Benjamin, a certain age, male, a certain manner of presenting himself. Will the same message that he leaves work for female, different age, different manner of presenting herself, or for Steve? Maybe not. The other point, of course, is that clients are different. A message that is left for a client may work with that client, may not work with a different client. Clients have got a wide variety of personalities. And thus, what's required is not a message, it's a strategy. And it's a strategy which you can prove. This gets into Elmer Wheeler's linguistic school of selling because it is short. And that means that the words you say are significant. The words you say, the nice thing about the linguistic school of selling is it's testable. You leave a message, you leave it 100 times. A certain percentage of those calls are going to be returned. Now, what is that percentage? I don't know, but it is testable. Then you leave another message. You leave it 100 times. What percentage of those calls are returned? It is testable. And then a third message. It's testable. Let's take an example. People overlook this. Let's say, I hope it's higher than this, but let's just take a number of 10% return calls because it's easy to work with. Well, if developing 3 messages and a fourth message should be your first message, but in a different tone of voice, if that kicked it up to 12%, from 10% to 12%, you would generate 20% more business. You would, without making any other changes whatsoever. You generate 20% more business. And then if an additional message kicked it up once again by even a small percentage, another 2%, that is to say from 10 to 12 to 14%, you would generate 40% more business because you'd be talking with 40% more people. And that's provable. Now, where do you get these 3 ideas? There are several chapters in my book, Unlimited Clients, which precisely address this. I'm presenting a concept here. You leave a message, you test it. You leave a message, you test it. You have 3 messages, test it, and 1-week intervals, and the number of calls that you get testable will increase quite dramatically through leaving that kind of a strategy. And I'll refer you for further information, as mentioned in the chapters that I brought to your attention.
It's one of those things that I think also very few people think about how they're leaving those messages, how they're leaving those voicemails, and how they're doing that. So what you're saying is working on the tone, working on the structure, working on this could create a 20% increase in your business.
And more than that, the numbers are quite likely to be dramatic. But where do you get these ideas? There is a specific way to test this, and it's a combination. Leaving message one, and you ought to write this down in your computer, all right? And then message two, and then message three. Well, what happens if you leave message three first, and then message two, and then message one, and reverse the order? What's the percentages? I mean, this is mentally interesting. It is absolutely provable. It's creative. And more to the point, it's something that's useful for you personally, not here's what works for somebody else. Here's what works for me. The amount of sophistication involved in this business due to coming up with ideas, testing, measuring is astronomical. I'll give you a real good example where intonation of a single word made a significant difference in terms of lost business for me, or when I corrected it, increased business for me. And this has great relevance because it revolves around not working a desk for a period of time. There are all kinds of people that, for whatever reason, you're off. It could be a maternity leave. It could be time off to take care of a parent. It simply could be an extended vacation. When you get back to your desk, can you return instantly, or at least very quickly, to full productivity without leaving things out? And some of these are very, very subtle. Example, my first trip to Africa, I've conducted in-house training and public speaking on 5 continents, but the first trip to Africa was really significant because it went much longer than I thought it would be. I had at the time 4 public speaking programs to be addressed, each one of which was managers and recruiters. And then I had a couple of programs lined up for in-house training with 2 companies. So I had my main program, which was in Johannesburg, was a 2-day program. Then I was going to do Pretoria, Durban, Cape Town, a couple of training programs, 12 days worth of work. There was travel. I had to get there and adjust. I had to speak with the people ahead of time so that when I'm in a different country, I spend a full day interviewing 2 managers, 2 recruiters, 2 owners, so I understand their terminology, how they work, but figure it was going to be a 3-day trip, a 3-week trip. Well, it went very well. And what I was perhaps not prepared for was how well it went with companies pulling me in for in-house training. And at the main program in Johannesburg, people flew down from all across the country of Africa, and they wanted me to go to their country. It turned into a 3-month trip. Well,
That's awesome.
that's 3 months. I mean, I was gone for 3 months. It was fun and it was interesting, but I got back to my city of St. Louis. My office had been going pretty well because I had a staff and they'd been shipping out products and doing various things. After all got settled down, I went back on a desk, which is what I do. And understand something, when you break things down into segments the way I'm suggesting, it's like driving a 6-speed manual shift car. You don't just drive, you go, okay, here's first gear, here's the clutch, here's second, here's wait, I ground the gears, let's double back and do that again. There's clutch over this way here, and you slowly put the gears together until you put it together in a cohesive whole. That makes it very easy to get back to full productivity after time away from your office for whatever reason. But I was back to full productivity, but there was a problem. I wasn't getting any referrals, by which I mean recruit leads. There are a lot of ways of getting leads, identification of candidates. Believe me, there's a whole section in the book, Real Recruiting, on it, totally unrelated to computer games or software or LinkedIn or any of this kind of stuff. But one of them is a specific technique for getting referrals from candidates. The problem was I wasn't getting any. So
Oh no.
something was wrong here. All right. I went back and I broke down my step by step modules to the recruiting call to make sure I was doing things properly. The end result, and it would have been proven had I not been doing it right, is my recruiting percentage of candidates recruited was exactly the same as when I had left. So the problem, I thought, could not be the recruiting call, but I wasn't getting referrals. So I recorded what I mentioned should be done at the beginning of this program. I recorded 15 pure asking for referrals from candidates. And I did it on a particular strip of recording. I didn't listen to it. I wanted time elapsed so I could evaluate it properly instead of thinking how great I had been. There's a particular technique for getting referrals, by which I mean recruit leads. It involves setting someone up, invoking a reciprocity principle. This comes from a book called The Psychology of Selling by Robert Cialdini, where he posits that when you do something for someone, they feel impelled to give back. And that really doesn't necessarily have to be actually doing for something for someone. It could simply be an offer of assistance, to which they reply, gee whiz, thank you very much. Richard Leakey, who was a legendary anthropologist, posited that the idea of cooperation is just wired into our DNA and could actually be responsible for some of the success of ourselves as a species. Thus, before you ask, and there's a technique for doing so, before you ask for referrals, recruit leads, you need to use this specific technique for invoking a reciprocity principle. This is in the book, Real Recruiting. The conversion, the transition from reciprocity principle, where he says, gee whiz, thank you very much, to asking for referrals is simply a question. Bob, maybe you can help me. I don't know how that goes. Just, Bob, maybe you can help me. That is the conversion from reciprocity before you bring up something which is fairly sophisticated, which is asking for referrals. So I listened to my 15 recordings of myself doing this material. It was not great. It was flat. It was just, maybe you can help me. That's it. Maybe you can help me. I couldn't believe it. I was, when you say Bob, I've been through 2 different 5-day Dale Carnegie training sales programs invoking the relationship school of selling. There are many different schools of selling. My corporate people sent me to 2 different Dale Carnegie sales programs. Relationship School of Selling Foundation, one of Dale Carnegie's 6 ways to get people like you, is to use their name. And I was like, maybe you can help me. The other side of it was, note how I dropped the voice at the end of it. Maybe you can help me. Hear the intonation there?
That was a big drop.
I wasn't doing any of that. It was a flat, maybe you can help me. Give me a, you know, and that is Elmer Wheeler's linguistic school of selling. The fact that the intonation and how you say these things is significant. Once I corrected it, bang, I went back to getting plenty of referrals. But if I hadn't done that, I would have gone on and on and on, not getting referrals, not getting referrals, not getting referrals, and would never have known that. Now, that's what I mean when I say this was intonation and using the person's name, but I'd have been away from this for 3 months. I have been doing obviously material about this business, but not that particular portion of it. One mistake in this business, even intonation, can cost you a fee. The same mistake made over and over and over again, and it's an easy thing to do when you're away from this business, can cost you a fortune. That's what I mean when I say the amount of precision in this industry that is required, not to do well, but to do really well, is overwhelming. And that's where simply required a training practice and all the stuff that we talked about previously, breaking it down step by step in segments, recording the calls, evaluating them after hours. I do this stuff myself. And that's a good example where if anybody is away from business for a period of time, could be as simple as a vacation, you'd better go back and look at this from a segmentation and recording. Otherwise, you just might be making some mistakes that would not have been made normally.
When you look at like how you've broken down the different segments in recruiting, how many different segments out is there total?
The true answer is I don't know. Uh, or it depends. A long time ago in the 1970s, there was a fellow named Phil Ross, who was a speaker that put together a program called the 27 Steps of the Placement Process. That was Phil Ross. But within that, he would think of a recruiting call as one step, a follow-up after interview as one step. It's a sophisticated business. I can remember many, many years ago when I first got into this business, someone that I had not seen for a good while said to me, I was just right in front of my fireplace, and he said, "What kind of business are you in?" "I'm in the executive search business." "What's that?" And I said, "It is the most sophisticated, difficult, multi-step type of selling that I've ever encountered in my life. And one day I'm going to be the best in the world at it." And whether I am or not, I have no idea. I have no comment on the subject. But the point is, it is such a complex multi-step for those people that get bored with their business. You do the same thing over and over and over and over again. If that's true and you're not making progress, the answer to it is you ought to realize what a sophisticated business it is. What I do is go in-house and conduct training programs with advanced level successful people and make them better. And part of that is new techniques, and part of that is improving the techniques that they're already doing.
Awesome. Well, Steve, before we flip over to the quick fire questions, is there anything else that you'd love to share?
Yes, I want people to do this stuff. And do this stuff means that they've got to be paying attention and ideally listening to this. There's an old public speaking phrase that goes, when men listened to Cicero, they were awed by his material and they agreed with everything he had to say. But when they listened to Mark Antony, they marched on Rome. I want people that are listening to this to march on Rome. And what that means is a renewed commitment to getting better in this business. People who are only listening to this once, I think they're making a mistake. They should listen to this repeatedly, over again and over again and over again. And what I'm talking about is simply concepts, the actual script, the material. What is the way to invoke the reciprocity principle? What are the three ways to identify calls to be returned? Any of this, the materials, go to the website, and I must say that's why we've got 1,200 pages of material. But the business is one which is exciting and it is interesting and it really has no limits in terms of how good you can get. It's just a matter of whether you're willing to work for it. And I hope that this is going to help people to march on Rome.
Hey, let's go to Rome, guys. Round up the troops. Well, jumping over to the quick fire questions. Steve, what advice would you give to a brand new recruiter that's just starting off in the industry?
Well, keep in mind that brand new to me means three different levels. There are three different types of people. If you are talking about what you have described, brand new, starting off in the industry, the best thing, honestly, is to learn what your manager is teaching you. Keep in mind that when I got into this business, I had had 10 years of serious corporate or direct selling and had been to huge numbers of corporate training programs with the best type of classical sales training available. I got into this business and I was a genuinely sophisticated, well-educated, top-level salesman. And what did I do? I saluted and I learned what my managers told me. I mean, that's exactly what you do. We've all seen people, I think, that are brand new, and by gosh, from the day they get into this business, they immediately try to figure, no, no, here's how it should be done. No, no, let's try this. Uh, I didn't do any of that, and you shouldn't do any of that if you're brand new. You should genuinely learn what your manager teaches you. And then after you have got some knowledge of the industry, then you can start fooling around. Uh, the second portion of this business that people ought to pay attention to is at 6 months. And it is a key area. At 6 months, you've got some knowledge of the business, which you obviously don't have the day you started. You don't really know what this business is about. The first step is to figure out if you're right for the business. Francis Bacon had a comment that went, they are happy men whose natures sort with their vocation. Well, that's the truth. This business is not right for everybody. I have a friend who's a dentist. I could learn to be a dentist and I could learn to be a good dentist, but would my nature sort with my vocation? No, right? And he wouldn't be very good at this business. He could learn it, I could teach it, but he surely would not be happy. The first step after 6 months is to say, okay, is this the kind of thing that I really do want to be doing? I will get better, I will earn more money, but the actual business itself, does it sort with my vocation? At 6 months, however, you can also go back and think about how you were taught. Now, I'm not referring to what was taught, but how was taught. An easy example is, was role playing used as part of your beginning training program? And the role playing should be done on the telephone. That doesn't mean, Bill, you try to recruit me. It means picking up the phone, calling, trying to recruit someone. If it's not, there are gaps. Look, there are excellent people that do a lot of good business in this industry. There are, truthfully, a lot of good managers in this industry. But when I first started, and I'm referring to started training, the hypothesis was it couldn't be done because every manager thought he was the best. And maybe he was. But if you say, okay, are you the best trainer? Most people, most managers probably do realize that they may not be, because they're different skill sets, working a desk, being a manager, training new people, all different things. So if role playing is not done, a 6-month person ought to go and say, listen, I'm not recruiting as well as I should. Can we do some role playing? How about if I pick up the phone and give you a call and try to recruit you, and then you tell me what I did? And most managers will look at that. Are you recording your calls and listening to it? At 6 months, truthfully, you don't really have the skill level to be able to look at this and say, I could do better here and there. You might get lucky, but but have your manager sit in on a call or record a call and then ask your manager to critique it. This is at 6 months. If your nature sorts with your vocation, then you ought to go back and think about, how is this material being taught and how can my manager help me to improve? The third step, which is an utterly critical one, is at 2 years. Something I did which was enormously impactful. The problem is, at 2 years, people start to think they know it all. They do. One of the most interesting things I ever did was when I was doing research on a product for managers that became Turbulent Times, a manager's guide to navigating difficult markets. It was how to get through a difficult market from a manager's perspective. And I knew some things. I had been through some recessions, but that's an area where there are people that frankly knew more than I did. So what I did was, whenever I'd be in a city, I would ask the person that I was working with or the head of the association, who's the person you know that has the most experience in this business? And I got answers. And then I would say, because it was a manager's program, is he a manager? Does he run a good operation? Would you want someone to go to work for him if it were your son or daughter? And I found 35 people that had minimally 35 years of experience in this business. And I sat down and talked with them. If I couldn't do that, I talked with them on the phone. I pulled out the manager's material that basically is of great assistance in helping people, managers, to get through a recession. I learned a lot of stuff. There's a line from Confucius that goes, "A single conversation with a wise man is worth a month's study of books." And I gained greatly. But one of the things I found from these people is they said that the average person in this industry stops learning at 2 years. And this was not just one person that told me this. It was a general statement that the average person in this industry stops learning at 2 years. That's because they think they've got it down. I was doing a program some years ago in Minnesota, and it went very, very well. It was a public speaking program. It was a top flight audience. I do well with excellent audiences. And afterwards, the someone named Dennis Anderson, who was a legend in the Twin City area, ran a good operation, high personal producer, big firm, gave me a call, and he booked me for two different programs with his operation, one of them with the experience, one of them with the less experience. And he told me a story. He had been sitting next to someone during my presentation, and Dennis had taken lots and lots of notes. The guy next to him wasn't taking any notes at all. Afterwards, Dennis said, "Excuse me, I thought this was a good speaker. I took a great many notes. You didn't take any. May I ask why not?" And the fellow, who was somewhat younger, said, "No point to it. I know all this stuff." And Dennis said, $400,000 producer at the time when that was an awful lot. And he also ran an operation. He was vice president of the association, said, "That's kind of interesting. May I ask how long you've been in this business?" And the fellow said, "Well, 2 years, but I know all this stuff." Well, Dennis had access to the attendance list, and he called up the owner of the firm and he said, "I spoke to this fellow. How's he doing?" Well, the answer is not very well. Is he improving? No, he really isn't. Now that's 2 years. And it's pretty clear he quit learning. Now, look, this is a great business. Somebody with marginal skills, if this guy had stayed in the business, I don't know if he did, he could have made his calls and he might pick up a client here and he might pick up a client there, and he would be recruiting people. So he'd slowly be building a database. He could yield better production with his marginal skills, but he probably wouldn't have been too happy about it. And believe me, that's the kind of guy that come the next recession, he ain't going to be here anymore because he doesn't have the skills he needs to do well. At 2 years is a critical time, and somebody better make it clear to themselves as to whether I need to improve and continue to improve, or else I'm just going to be pretty well marginal forever.
Well, I think that really goes into like something else is like the decision for you to learn versus the decision for you being told you need to learn. Because looking back on my career, we'll look at that 2 year mark of mine, and I at that little world of mine that I was at my 2 year mark, I felt like I knew it all. Like, but that was also my little world, and I knew nothing outside of that. It wasn't until I got around like other producers and other companies and really just like opened myself up, I realized it's a whole big world out there. So that really
And
just goes,
yeah, even people, even look, you started with a good sized firm, didn't you?
oh, it's gigantic, worth billions.
You know, people think of trainers as though they, to be a trainer for a big firm is a positive. Just, or even if you have a good manager, sometimes they think of that as a positive, and it certainly is. But understand what people with your firm do. The people that were involved in training, they brought in people, they got them developed to the point of adequacy. And then they went to a new bunch of people and they got them developed to the point of adequacy. And then they went to a new bunch of people. And those people that had been developed, maybe if they were right for the business, to the point of adequacy, they were left on their own. And maybe some of them did well because they were brilliant and had great talent. That you can't deny that. It's there, but it is not duplicatable. And maybe others just stayed there and did a little better and a little better, and maybe others dropped out of the business. The business lends itself towards advanced level selling skills, but people don't have those advanced level selling skills because they were never trained in that area. Our business progressed just as I'm talking about. Look, there it goes, and all the people that think they want to become trainers knows is here's what works for me, or here's what worked for someone else, or I spoke with someone, he says it works for him. There are really, think of the comparison. There are thousands of books on sales. Right? It could be insurance sales, it could be thousands. How about this industry? 4. That's it. 4. I mean, there have been others. Confessions of a Corporate Headhunter came out 60 years ago, and it was, here's some of the confessions of a corporate headhunter. But this simply indicates the difference in the progress in professional selling and the progress in developing people in this industry. Now, you don't have to worry about getting all the professional selling stuff, because the truth is, it's all put together for you. It's all put together for you. There's me.
Well, and that, and that kind of like goes into like the next question I always ask is like, you know, for people that have been in the business, maybe burnt out, or, you know, finally hitting the place where they want to grow, what is the thing that they need to do to get ahead?
There are 2 things. All right. Now, keep in mind, one of them, several of them we've discussed, recording calls, or okay, all this. All right. But there are 2 things. The first thing you need to do, honestly, is to get involved in reading books or audios and concentrating. And I mean, really concentrating. Francis Bacon had a comment that some books are to be tasted, some to be swallowed, and some few to be chewed and digested. I'm always taken aback by people that say, I've read your books. Well, great. Or even worse, I've read your book, singular, as though there's only one. You know, I mean, reading is to the mind as exercise is to the body. Now, think about that analogy. I mean, think of your own background. Reading is to the mind as exercise is to the body. You've got to get involved in seriously reading and contemplating and building in. And what I've always done in books that I read, underlining, highlighting, marking up, reviewing. Tom Alacio, who set you up, or set me up with this interview and introduced me to you, reads the books that I have assiduously, and he's a great long-term producer. The other thing, which is even more significant, after really immersing yourself in the material, there's something else, and it's rather literary. Walk through the mist. Walk through the mist. Now, I'll explain what that means. There was a 17th century Japanese poet named Basho that said, if you walk through the mist, you will get wet. And the significance of this is, if you continually expose yourself to high quality, serious material, it will sink in. In the short term, you immerse yourself, but after you immerse yourself and study, you walk through the mist. I do this myself. Look, I've written, depending on how you count it, 6 books, 6 300+ page books. I know how to do this stuff. But before I launch myself into any book, I've got an extensive library, or portion of the library, on the craft of writing, but I pull out 3 books. I pull out Strunk and E.B. White's The Elements of Style. I pull out Fowler's Modern English Usage. And I pull out a book by a fellow named William Zinsser, basically on writing nonfiction stuff, which is called On Writing Well. I've got several copies of each one of these books. because I don't want to be affected by my highlighting and underlining in the previous one. And I read these three books before I launch myself into a new book. And it is not as though halfway through I go back and I go, what do Strunk and White say about this paragraph? I don't do that. But I walk through the mist. And if I just read books about writing cleanly and properly and truly and well, it kind of sinks into me. And what comes out is I get wet. I've walked through the mist. Those four books that I referenced, there are 120 chapters, cumulatively, probably a few more, 120 chapters. Thus, if you figure, gosh, if you look at it and figure, okay, well, 120 chapters, if you read one chapter a day, single chapter a day before work, it's 6 months by the time you get to the end of it. You're walking through the mist. Real recruiting audio is 40, 15-minute modules. Anybody that commutes to work or anybody that wants to get a good solid start in the morning, a 15-minute module, if you figure 20 working days per month, it's 2 months worth. Larry Noble, wonderful speaker, has got an audio series consisting of 24 30-minute modules. You walk through the mist, and an experienced person will start to absorb and pick up and use things automatically after he's gone through this to start with.
Well, this actually perfectly goes into my next question. What book has had a personal impact on your own career?
Well, uh, pretty clearly, I read a great deal.
Which is
But
why I was asking.
my career actually is three different parts. So there are basically three different, well, probably more than that, but three different books. One of them is Frank Betcher, which is Betgar, How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling. It is a classic book. And Dale Carnegie, uh, no mean public speaker and trainer himself, said Betcher was the best sales trainer he'd ever seen. If you want an interesting story, by the way, Frank Betcher was third baseman for the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team. And all of a sudden, on a hot July day, he made a throw to first base and his arm went away. I mean, and it never came back. And what does an unemployed third baseman do? He got into sales, and in his case, insurance sales. And basically, How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling is a classic, absolutely appropriate today, very well motivated. The second book, uh, Peter Drucker's book, The Effective Executive. People think of me as the quintessential advanced level sales trainer, and I am. But uh, I built my own organization from one person to ultimately 6 offices, 45 recruiters. I conduct training programs for managers and public speaking programs for managers. The effective executive, which has real relevance to an individual. Keep in mind, it is executive. Drucker's written a huge number of books on management, but it's an excellent book and highly recommended. And finally, I probably read Thomas Stroh's. I've read all of Thomas Stroh's books, but Training and Developing the Professional Salesman has had a significant effect. You need to learn different skill sets. And I can't honestly say that Frank Betcher's book was useful in terms of training and developing the professional salesman, or training and developing the professional salesman useful in terms of managing. I mean, these are three different skill sets. And I've learned them all, and those are probably the three books that had the greatest impact of me from a professional standpoint.
Phenomenal. Well, that kind of goes into my next question. You've talked about the arches in your own career. You've had multiple recruiting offices and tons of recruiters working for you. Plus, you went on this entire training journey within the recruitment space with trying to help up level the entire community. What do you think has been a major part of your own personal success?
Well, Let me slightly duck the question because I will answer the question, but you don't find too many successful people that say I'm successful. I don't think of myself that way. I think of myself as making progress, right? And I am making progress. Um, I suppose the answer to it, however, to the degree I've been got along, uh, is for me there is no finish line. When I achieve one goal, I start another one. The other side of it is I like learning new things. I started off, keep in mind, as a kid, with a desire to be the world's greatest salesman. I won't claim that. But there is an excellent book called The Greatest Sales Stories Ever Told by the World's Greatest Salesman by the best sales author of our generation, Robert Shook, and prominently featured in The Greatest Sales Stories Ever Told by the World's Greatest Salesman is Steve Finkel with a particular subject. There's also, by the way, an excellent story in there under the subject line of The Blind Dentist. It's a great book. And that particular book, purely about it's not about our industry, but that subject is. There was a dentist that went blind, got into our industry. And when you read that chapter, you almost feel a little bit embarrassed because you go, by golly, I've got my flaws, but I see all right. And in any case, I like learning to sell. Then I got into this business and it was complex and it was challenging and it was interesting and I learned it. And then I had to learn to train and I had to learn to be a public speaker. A public speaker is a whole different skill set than training. And then I had to learn to be a video producer. Believe me, I've produced 3 different video products. I recommend them all, but there was a learning curve to being a video producer and audios and writing books. Good golly, who knows how to write a book? But the truth is, I learned how to do it and got better at it. So I would say there's no finish line, and I don't mind being in a position of not knowing what the heck I'm doing. I mean, if you, Benjamin, sat down to write a book right now, you wouldn't know what the heck you were doing. Well, I didn't know what I was doing either, but that's okay. I don't mind that. If someone else can learn it and do it and accomplish it, I can do it. And so can you.
Well, that's if you want a good laugh, that's actually one of my goals this year is actually taking some of these stories from the Elite Recruiter podcast and turning it actually into a book. So learning how to do that right now.
It's a mess. Don't try.
Well, and one of my favorite questions I always like to wrap up the conversation with is, everything that you know now, everything that you've done, the the ups and downs that you've had in this industry, the people that you've met, like there's a whole gamut of like information that you know and you've gone through. But if you had the chance to get a cup of coffee with yourself, the first week that you started your recruiting career, what would you tell yourself?
Gee, I would say, son, buy Amazon at $8 a share. And and if you could make it to 2022, there's a horse called Rich Strike that will win the Kentucky Derby at 80-1. So I suppose, look, for people like you and I, people that either run our own business or alternatively, we're commission-oriented salespeople, you do not get to the top of a mountain without going through rough and difficult and winding and perilous paths. That's the facts of the matter. I had, I think, and developed the character to enable me to get to the approach anyway. We'll see where it ends up, the top of the mountain. But there is a line from Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, wonderful book, but it said, say to yourself, if it is humanly possible, you can do it too. There are always hesitations and problems and difficulties and second guessing and all kinds of stuff. But the truth is, you don't get to the top of the mountain without going through rough and difficult paths. But following probably the greatest of the Roman emperors, if it is humanly possible, you can do it too. And I would suggest exactly the same thing to the audience. It requires difficulties. But if it's humanly possible, you can do it too.
That is solid.
There is something I'd like to mention to the group before we disappear. And you've been good enough not to ask the question about technology and AI and the future of the business. Is that a question you want me to address?
Yeah, I mean, I know, and the reason why I kind of like sat on the fence on that question is because like you're so strong in the classical stuff, but I mean, at the same time, like artificial intelligence, automation, like what are your thoughts on all this?
Well, I really won't address AI because the truth is it's pretty new and you never quite know where it's going to go at an early stage of development of practically anything. We can all think back of groovy new technology that didn't go anywhere, and others that turned out to be quite useful. But uh, there's a book that I'll refer you to by the ultimate techie, a fellow named Andrew Grove, who developed a firm called Intel and progressed. It's now the world's largest chip maker. And along the way, he ran into problems. The marketplace changed, difficulties occurred. I mean, there were all kinds of problems there. Uh, and he made some reference to that specifically. He said in a wonderful book, great title, think about this, Only the Paranoid Survive. That's the title of the book. And he said, when a new piece of technology comes along, he said, people jump on it and they build it up and they hustle it and they work double time to make it seem larger and more significant, more overwhelming than it is. And then he said, mostly it turns out that it isn't quite what it's cracked up to be. I suggest that that's probably something that you ought to consider would be the proper way to put it. There are a few articles out on the cons of AI. I won't address them other than to say that Andrew Grove made the comment that people jump on it and they hype it and they hustle it and they build it up and they make it appear to be much larger than it actually should be. And maybe it is and maybe it isn't. But as Mr. Grove said, under the circumstances, you ought to be cautious. Easy, and then this addresses not what you've addressed, but the whole concept of automation and technology. Easy really is a wonderful marketing tool. You don't need to work to lose weight because you see, if you just take this pill or this patch, it's going to, or this injection, it's going to work wonderfully for you. And you certainly don't need to exercise to build up muscles or get a six pack because you see, you can just attach these to your body and the electrical currents will automatically tighten them up. And by the way, here's an interesting new idea that's just come up where you will never lose money in the market, only gain, never lose. Well, easy is a great selling tool. And we see this to some degree in our industry. You don't need to work to develop these 3 different methodologies and record them, and then do a 4th one with a different tone of voice to get those calls returned. You just do your magic digital email, and all of a sudden, the candidates will come swarming in. Or you just place the ads here, and here will be great candidates. Or you just kind of automatically place them right here, and by golly, clients will be beating down your doors because you're SEO, or you're got the magic email, or you've got the blogs, or you've, good luck. There are a couple of things to be considered when you think about that. One of them is every idea, piece of technology, sourcing information is also available to your clients. The sourcing trainers, for the most part, figured out a long time ago that your clients would pay you more money, would pay them more money than you would for, who knows, the LinkedIn recruiting tools or the sourcing or how to put Boolean strings together or any of this kind of stuff. So you are basically competing with your clients and with every other person who takes the easy way out instead of learning serious skills to this business. The other side of it is, as you have probably noticed, We are an offshore world these days. There are a lot of technologically astute people in Sri Lanka and India and the Philippines and maybe Pakistan and any number of other areas, who knows, Vietnam, for goodness sakes, who really are pretty technologically astute at hunting around on the internet and actually speak pretty good English, and they will do their jobs for $3 an hour or $4 or $5 or $10. And you're not the only one who's getting stuff from them, as I am, saying, gee whiz, here is our MPC program from the Philippines that will help you, and it's only $600 a month or whatever it may be. Or here is how our part-time recruiters in India will help you on this kind of stuff. The clients are getting it too. But what can't they do? Here's a rule. You shouldn't be doing anything that can be done equally well by someone who's paid less. And what we do for the clients is what they cannot do for themselves. And what can't they do for themselves? They can't be you. They can't be a skilled, brilliant, knowledgeable, top-flight recruiter with genuine, serious selling skills that you've developed over a period of time. You do that, and you really don't have to worry about things. One never knows what's going to happen in the next year. But you do know this: the possibility of either a recession or a cataclysmic event, whatever it might be, leading to a recession is not zero. I don't know what it is, but it's not zero. And that's true for the year after, and the year after, and the year after, and the year after. And the answer to that is to develop the skills that you need on generating new clients, in particular, new clients that will help you through. And if people say, well, gee, I'm doing okay, Steve, here's a question. During the last year, what percentage of your business came from new clients? New clients, not repeat deals with existing clients, but people you'd never done business with before. You probably need the answer to that question. And once you take a look at it and look at the whole panoply of skills that are involved in this business, the only way out to become not only successful in the sense of making money, but really fun and enjoyable and interesting, and to be an artist in this business, comes from learning the business thoroughly. It'll take you some time, but I strongly suggest it's absolutely worth it.
Man, Steve, this has been a phenomenal interview. Before I let you go, first of all, how can people get a hold of you?
Nothing complex. My website is Steve Finkel. Remembering my last name is Finkel, and it's Steve. And overseas they call me Steven, but here it is Steve Finkel, no space, no dot, just Steve Finkel .com. And the email address is just stevefinkel@mindspring.com. There is up on my website, there's phone number and emails and stuff like that as well.
Cool. And is there anything else you'd love to share before I let you go?
Well, you have not asked the question about the differences between the books.
Oh, yes. Okay. So you got
Right.
before I let you go, you have 4 books out.
I do. And they're all different, as are the audios. And some of this transfers over from a management standpoint. The foundational book for the industry for new people is Search and Placement, a Handbook for Success by Larry Nobles and Steve Finkel. And I'll suggest something to any manager listening. You're a good example of this. The biggest problem any manager has is figuring out who's serious about working to learn this business and who isn't. Now you'll find out after a month, 2 months, 6 months, when you have turnover, how many people started with you in your firm that aren't there anymore. A lot, right? And that costs the manager. I mean, it cost him finances, it cost him emotion, it cost him all kinds of things. There is a way to greatly improve the selection process and reduce turnover. If a manager will give a person before, I repeat this, before an offer is extended, the book Search and Placement, A Handbook for Success by Steve Finkel and Larry Nobles. It's a complete overview of the business. It's not everything, but it's everything from organization to close to developing repeat business. And say, look, I want you to read this book. I want you to underline it. I want you to highlight it, and then come back and we'll talk about it before an offer is extended. And if he doesn't do it, don't hire him. Right? I had a manager, my first manager had been regional sales manager with National Cash Register, supervised probably 100 salespeople through sub-managers. People would come to him and he would say, look, I want to be a manager. And he'd go, okay, fine. Here's a book. It was called The First Time Sales Manager. And it's a pretty good book. And he said, I want you to read this book, The First Time Sales Manager. Then come back to me and we'll talk about it. He had stacks of these books. He swore to me that in 90%, he was not exaggerating, 90% of the situations, he never heard from these people again. I mean, they were out there selling to their sub-manager, but they never came to him, the regional manager, never heard from him again. Now, look, what would the likelihood be of someone being successful in this business if being given a book and saying, here's about this business, I want you to read it, underline it, highlight it, we'll talk about it, and he didn't do it? How were his chances? Now, that's not the right book for Benjamin Mennett to read. At some point, it is, because there is a lot there, but it's certainly not where you should start. The book Unlimited Clients, Perfect Prospecting for Today's Recruiter, is the foundation of doing well for an experienced person and to getting what it says, new prospects, new clients that will help you to get through any difficulties that might occur. We don't like to think about it, but there is an element of luck in this business. It evens out over a period of time, but there is. I was once sitting with a brand new person on a desk, and his third call, I had gone through training. Fortunately, he worked for me. I had gone through training. I'd gone through role playing. Now he was going to pick up the phone, call up prospecting. His third call in the business, he picked up an account that generated $300,000 in production his first year. And the next year, he generated $400,000 with that single account. And as I say, fortunately, he was working for me. But you know what happened? The company was acquired by someone else. They quit hiring from him, and he's not in business anymore because he had never developed the skills to generate new accounts and new business. He got lucky. And all I can say is I wish it had been me, but it was him. But yet he wasn't there. When you first started in business, Benjamin, were there people that became successful early?
There were a lot of people that became successful early. I was super slow out of the gate, banging my head against the wall. But the funny thing is, and had this conversation with other recruiting friends, like the people that were gangbusters out of the gate, they're not recruiters anymore.
Right. Because they thought they were terrific early. And if they had continued being lucky, they might have turned into trainers. You know, it's Unlimited Clients is a specific book, not only on, I mentioned this earlier, marketing the candidate, that's part of it, of course, but the majority is prospecting and getting new accounts. That's what people need to focus on because they're the ones that pay the bills. Thirdly, real recruiting is actually composed of three different sections. One of them is orienting the client to work with you properly so that he proceeds quickly, extends good offers, gives you the proper feedback. This is a section, and selecting the assignment on which to recruit as well. A lot of people feel I already know how to select the assignment properly. I'll suggest to you they don't to the level of sophistication and orienting the client to move quickly and extend fair offers. that you'll get in the first third. The center third of real recruiting is identifying candidates unrelated to social media and the internet. And the third part of it are the real specifics of the segments of the actual recruiting call. And when you put all these segments together, there's a portion about, okay, we hit this segment, this segment, this segment, this segment. Let's put it all together for you and feel the rhythm, feel the singing of it, feel the way it rings. And you put the call together into a beautiful, cohesive whole segment, 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 and then it blocks up all together. And finally, the fourth one is the book that you've got, Breakthrough. There it is right there, Breakthrough 2.0. It is basically, it's a little different. It's not a cohesive, here's how you get new accounts. Here's how you find and recruit candidates. It's pretty much 35 essays that start off with, okay, you are the world's best recruiter. I acknowledge that. No problem. You are. But don't tell me you're perfect. I've spent my life doing in-house training with the best recruiters in the country, in the whole world. And here are the areas where they can improve. And maybe you can too. And that's what it is. It's 350 pages, actually, of 30 different sections on how experienced recruiters can improve. You immerse yourself in them one by one if you're an experienced person. And then later on, you walk through the mist of the books or the audios.
That's phenomenal. Well, Steve, I just want to say thank you so much for jumping on this podcast. And mostly it's, I came across you because other high producers actually were talking about you. You've been a staple in the industry, and so many top billers, so many firm owners have mentioned you as one of the reasons why they're successful. So I want to say thank you for coming on and sharing. And for the listeners, I know that this podcast interview definitely leveled you up. So I'm so excited that you got to listen to this. Thank you, guys.
It's a terrific business, and you are in the right place at the right time.
Awesome. And let's crush 2024 and grow together, guys. Thank you.